Hey, and
Hey,
welcome everybody. I am Tanner Treppin, joined here by Michael, and
hey.
I'm a Christian. And Michael, I think you're an atheist. I suppose that.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
I am
cool.
an a classical atheist. I mean, I'm not a seven on the Dawkins scale of saying I know absolutely there's no God. I'm a six. Like
Okay,
some people call that an agnostic atheist, but I don't really like that phrase because it just muddies the water. Like
gotcha.
I don't believe in any deities, so I'm an atheist, but I recognize I could be wrong.
Sweet. Well, I'm excited for this conversation today. Thank you so much for joining, man.
And if it's not too much trouble, when you say you're a Christian, could you kind of give me a little bit more of a definition? Like, are you? I know you're not Catholic, right? So you're Protestant and fall under a sort of an evangelical umbrella. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. So for anyone who watches this, this is Michael and I's first time actually meeting over and talking at
Oh,
all.
sure.
And so I have a channel, some Brook students, and I am a youth pastor, and I want to help students think about their faith and not just believe because your parents believe, but actually believe it's true and have reasons to think that. And so I grew up as a Christian in a Christian household. My parents are Christian, and by Christian I mean a non-denominational evangelical Christian, like Reformed type theology, most part, but also um, now have believed in Christianity because my parents taught me it. But then I feel like I've had like personal encounters with God where God has like shown himself to me through the word and through experiences.
Mhm.
But for the most part, those are emotional experiences, right?
Yes.
And you got to have some, truth, some reasons actually mentally for why you believe in it as well. And so uh, going through college, out of college, now for the past couple of years got exposed to William Lane Craig, as you mentioned in your video, and Frank Turek, and these different apologists like that, and it's helped bring confidence that like, hey, I'm not just believing nonsense, but there's actually good reasons to believe when I believe, and so
Right.
that's kind of some background there.
Okay. And born and raised in the South?
Born and raised in Pennsylvania
Oh, okay. All right.
originally, and then when I was in high school, my dad changed or transferred his job down here to South Carolina, and that's what I'm at now.
Nice, nice. Okay. My daughter graduated from Chapel Hill. So I spent a few months there right before she graduated about 6 years ago. So I love the South. I love the food. I just don't like the hot, muggy weather
Yeah,
and the
I hated it
yeah,
when I first moved down here. I could
yeah,
not go outside,
yeah.
but
I did basic training in Kentucky, and at the graduation ceremony, I literally passed out during the ceremony. Like
wow,
I fell over unconscious. And
wow,
yeah, I woke up in a air conditioned room, and they're like, "What happened?" I'm like, If you lock your knees while you're standing in for at standing at either at attention or standing even at ease, if you lock your knees, you cut off blood flow, and you can just pass out. Bam! It was
damn,
so hot. It was just yeah. So I'm super happy. Just as just to say a little bit more about myself, I moved. I left the states and I live in Mexico, and I live in Guadalajara, where the weather here is just really, really amazing. We're at the same elevation as Denver, about 10,000 so feet, but we're so far south. It doesn't snow here. The winters are mild. It'll drop down to zero in the middle of the night, but the daytimes are usually clear. And
cool. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Sweet.
no, it's really great. And so my background, just to follow up on your
Yeah.
Christianity. So my dad was and is an atheist. However, he didn't raise me. My parents divorced when I was very young,
Oh
and
wow.
my mom took us to a Christian church, much against my dad's will, but he didn't have much of a say in it. So I grew up as a kid and into my teen years accepting Jesus, not as a evangelical sort of non-denominational. I got my first marriage was in a Presbyterian church, and it was pretty standard. I lived in Orange County at the time, and then over the course of the next few decades, I did join. I was Assemblies of God for a while, so kind of Pentecostal, and I ended up at the Vineyard. In the Vineyard, actually Vineyard Anaheim, which weirdly enough doesn't exist anymore. Um, but the Vineyard movement still exists. So that was my last church experience, and that was where I deconstructed out of. And the Vineyard, even though they do a little bit of crazy stuff, is still they're Nicene Creed and traditional evangelicals, and similar with like the Calvary Chapel, like Chuck Smith's movement and stuff. It kind of came out of that. So they tend to believe a little bit more like the Pentecostal. So in my time at the Assemblies of God, I was also doing kind of the same stuff, like believing in miracles, speaking in tongues, and
Gotcha.
wanting to do the stuff Jesus did. That was kind of the founder of the Vineyards movement. Say, oh, let's do the stuff Jesus did, like heal the sick and all that kind of stuff. So that was my experience, and I sort of deconstructed out of that about a decade ago. So I've been, I've been an atheist and like a non-believer and stuff for that period of time. And during that time, as probably anyone that's been around YouTube in this space knows, that there's a lot of us that feel we were incredibly damaged or hurt through our Christianity. And so part of our motivation, and I'll speak for myself, part of my motivation is to try to help Christians, and other faiths. I mean, there's arguments of whether, say, a Mormon is really a Christian or a
Yeah.
Catholic. I know evangelicals who think Catholics are going to hell and the Pope's the devil. So it depends on your flavor, right? Like there's all these different beliefs. So part of the motivation is, and why I'm still interested and why I still pay attention to this stuff, is I feel like there is a need for people to have to hear experiences like mine. And I think this is how you and I kind of met through this. The Prophet Azad, he's kind of did a critique of your guys' video.
Yeah.
I follow him a lot. Sometimes I ask myself, why do I listen to hours of these guys talk? Right? I mean, it's just in some ways it seems insane. Like, why do I care? But it's because of that motivation, like, of knowing where we came from and the desire to help other people. It's not like trying to get people to deconvert or trying to make atheists, although that's part of it. It's kind of trying to help people to think critically so that we can live in a better world, however that works out. So it can translate into politics and religion, which sometimes get intermeshed, right? So if you look back over history, nobody's going to deny that religion and politics did a lot of evil things.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And
Yeah.
so where we might disagree is, you might say, well, yeah, but politics are a lot better now, or Christianity is a lot better. Like, we don't own slaves in the South anymore. Look, we've improved. And so our position as atheists is, yeah, but you haven't gone far enough. You still believe these things that we think are harmful. So that's kind of where the fight is, so to speak. And and I think we can have these friendly fights, but it's still a conflict of worldviews, right? Your worldview and my worldview are in conflict. I don't think there's any disagreement about that.
Yeah.
And I think you would say to me, look, Michael, if everybody kind of came to my camp, the world would be better. And I would kind of say, hey, if everyone came to my camp, the world would be better. And that's sort of that's kind of where the conflict is. So it's like, so the kind of the point of the discussion here is, how do we know, what methodology do we use to get to the point where we're less wrong? And I'm pulling that from a blog by a guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's a former Orthodox Jew who's now an atheist. And he says, we're never going to be right about everything, but we can be less wrong. And so how do we be less wrong? And from a materialistic atheist side is, how do we be less wrong, or how do we get closest to the truth, is that we have to have a good methodology to get there. And we have to use a type of Bayesian logic, where Bayesian gives us this idea that we have prior probabilities about what is true, and then we test, and we look at the world, we look at the universe, and we say, does this describe things better or not? And to put it in a simple way, it's like, if we're going to bake a cake, we might say, hey, let's put a pound of salt in it, and no, that doesn't work. Let's put a pound of sugar. Oh, hey, that tastes better. So sugar is better than salt. So it's kind of like the way the scientific method works. And so one of the arguments against Christianity is that it seems as if every time that a Christian gets to a place where there's like these two choices, they make the choice based on the presupposition they have, not on the evidence. Like, it's like, I've already decided there's a God, so I have to make sure everything fits into that package. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
At least we may not agree, but at least I always want to be understood. So
yeah, no, I understand that, and I want to commend that. I think that's right. That you don't want to just believe something because you want to, like, and that was a big point in the beginning of your video, of your critique of Mary and I. You brought in the Matrix, and I thought those quotes are actually really good. That like the eating the steak, and the true freedom is not just eating the fake steak just because it tastes good and you want to live in the fake world, but to be in the reality, no matter what the
Yes.
consequence of that is. And I want that. If God doesn't exist, then I don't want to believe. But if He does exist, I do want to believe. And I want to have
Right.
that type of commitment.
Well, no, and I commend that, and especially since you work with youth, this is so one of the problems that people in your position have, and this happens in academia, is that when you've committed to an organization, you have back running in the back of your mind. It's like, if I question this, I'm fired, or if I reveal that there's doubts, I'm fired. If I come out and say, hey, I might be an atheist, I'm fired. Like there, so a lot of times what happens is people will quote, say, a Christian apologist and say, hey, majority of Bible scholars believe Jesus rose from the dead. Well, that's not a true statement if you include the majority of all scholarship. It's only true if you include the majority of scholars that have signed a paper saying, I believe Jesus rose from the dead and I will not change no matter what from that, because they know they're going to be fired. Or, you can't be a professor at an evangelical setting and say, well, maybe God doesn't exist. Like, you're not
Yeah,
allowed to do that. So
yeah, that makes sense.
that's one of the criticisms about uh, uh, the free thinking and critical thinker claim, which was kind of the impetus of Prophet of Zod's video, is he was kind of saying, and maybe we can get a little bit into that, is but because this is also what I heard Mary say. What I heard Mary say was, when I got to college, I had doubts. So I went to a bunch of apologists like Lee Strobel and William Lane Craig, and Josh McDowell, and they proved to me I'm good. So I'm a critical thinker and I really challenged it. So my challenge to you guys was, no, 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 that's not free thinking. Free thinking is when you wipe the slate completely clean and you start with no presuppositions other than, like, logic is true, basic. If a thing is A and a thing is B and they're different, they can't be the same. And if they're the same, they're, A equals A and 1 + 1 = 2. Like, if you start from a foundation of no presuppositions and logic, where would you end up? So the atheist position is, look, you can't end up logically believing in a revealed God. Like, you just can't. It's not logical. You have to add in these other things. And that's not fair if you're going to be truly a free critical thinker, because logically you wouldn't end up there. Like, and then the pushback to that is generally speaking kind of what you said. It's like, well, I looked at the evidence and I had a personal feeling. I could
Mm-hmm.
get you 1,000 videos that say, I know Joseph Smith got revealed from God.
Yeah,
I had a burning. I mean, I've watched those videos, and
yeah,
and look, and I've known Mormons. Mormons are lovely people, and they're not dishonest. Their hearts are in the right place, and their parents are teaching their children what they believe is true. And I think you would agree these aren't horrible people, but I think you also have to agree that they're indoctrinating their kids with falsehoods, right? I mean,
yeah.
is it
So
there?
no, so yeah, if I can share on that, just so that I actually love that you bring up the Mormon thing, because that like totally resonates with me, because I a lot of people think they are Christian when they're Mormon, and I would say
Mhm.
they're not. I think they're
Right.
lost, that they don't truly know God. And so if I'm saying that about them, how do I know that I'm not like that too? Like the
Right.
same
No,
type of thing.
it's a fair question. And
Yeah,
I
and
study this. I used to invite Mormons into my house and preach the gospel to them and tell them that they're wrong. We'd have hour-long discussions. Um,
yeah,
I I actually heard Dr. Walter Martin, but long before he passed away, obviously, speak on this. And I don't know if you've ever read Kingdom of the Cults, but I was fully into that. Like, hey, okay, Kingdom of the Cults is like, a giant tome of why all the cults are wrong, like the Mormons, the Jehovah Witness, blah blah blah. So he was a big, so he that thinking led into, like, the Bible Answer Man came out of that. Hank Hanegraaff and that kind of theology. It's more like a conservative, and so one of the things that bothered me when I believed exactly like you believe is, how would Jesus reject a 5-year-old who's honestly praying to him because her parents are Mormon and they've given her the wrong Jesus? Like, imagine you're God, and you have this beautiful, sweet 6-year-old, 7-year-old girl who can't conceptualize, she can't critically think yet, and she's saying, dear Jesus, I love you so much, and I think, like, please help mommy get better, or whatever she's praying for. In your worldview, you have to believe that Jesus not only rejects her and is going to send her to hell, but like he's ignoring that honest prayer. And I don't see, like, for me, that was a huge thing, even as a Christian, that like kind of shattered in my heart a little bit. It's like, how can I say God's loving if he's going to reject that 5-year-old girl? I wouldn't do that. I mean, would you do that? Would you do that with your own kids? I mean, how could you say you would?
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. But I guess initial thoughts on that would be, I wouldn't say he necessarily is rejecting that prayer. Like I feel like God hears the prayer not just of believers, of Christians, but he hears the prayers of everybody. And just because the answer, isn't immediate, doesn't mean he's not working behind the scenes, causing different things to happen and stuff like that.
Well, okay, sure, but then you also have to posit that at some point God says to this 5-year-old, well, you're now old enough to know the truth. So now I'm gonna, now you're outside. Now you're rejected. So whether she's 15 or 20 or 25, you know very well as I do that if you grow up with loving parents who teach you in a faith, it's very, very hard to get out of that faith. Like,
Yeah,
if you talk to a Hindu that was raised, and now if you talk to somebody that was raised in a very um, abusive environment, especially like a strong cult,
yeah,
it, it is hard for them to get out, but when they do, they really, really see it like, oh, that was abusive. But most people that are raised in a reasonably loving family, and most parents love their kids the best they can, it's very hard to reject this thing. So going back to the 5-year-old Mormon girl, if Jesus is listening to her prayer and cares about her, you're still having to posit that at 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever you believe the age accountability is, that if she dies, she's going to go to hell now because she should have known better. And my question to you is, how could she possibly have known better? She grew up in Salt Lake City. Everyone she knows is a Mormon. Everyone she trusts is a Mormon. Everyone that she's put her faith in is a Mormon. And everyone that's in her life that's accountable to her has told her Mormonism is true. So I can give you the answer to work around this. Is C.S. Lewis would say, well, she's still going to heaven. Like, this is from The Last Battle, where the 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 I can't remember the name of the false god had warriors, and when Peter and Lucy and stuff are in heaven, the warrior, it's kind of like, it's sort of built on the Muslim model, right? So the warriors that were fighting Aslan, one of those warriors is in heaven, and C.S. Lewis's position is, yeah, he worshipped the false god appropriately and with all his heart and all he knew, so God accepted him. Now, obviously, that's not a traditional evangelical belief that everyone's going to
yeah,
heaven, right? But then that goes back to, you're still believing that this lovely 5-year-old girl is going to go to hell because she grew up in the wrong place. And
yeah,
that's one of the things that as atheists we say, no, I mean, if that's true, why would you worship a God that would do that? Like, to me, that's
mm,
horrific.
mm.
So um
Yeah. Can I say a couple of responses to
yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So a couple things. So I'm gonna rewind just a little bit.
Yeah.
You brought up my wife and what she was saying in that video. So like you were saying, when she got to college, she had doubts and she went to an apologist, and and so I think what the point you're getting at is when you're a Christian, you want to stay Christian because your friends are Christian, your parents are Christian, and it's painful to reject all that, basically. Or if you're a
Hmm.
teacher, a pastor, professor, to reject that, lose your job. There's consequences for changing your mind, and that's blocks intellectual honesty.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I would say I agree with that, and that you don't like to just surround yourself with Christians if you're doubting and believe whatever else is believing. Um, and that's wrong to only do that, because
Hmm.
if the Mormons doing that, they're going to stay Mormon, like exactly what we're saying. Like
Right.
if you have doubts, you think this is wrong, well, just keep reading Mormon books and keep surrounding yourself with Mormons that will encourage you, and you'll keep believing the same thing. And so there's got to be exposure to other teachings, other thoughts, to be able to see what really is true and what's a bad argument, what's a good argument. I totally agree with that. And well, for my wife, I think she went to a local Charleston college here, CFC, which is pretty secular, not just normal college, but she was in a biology major, and just over and over with all these biology professors, like there is no God, like atheism always is, just very naturalist.
Hmm.
And so she's feeling very like, man, maybe I'm wrong. And so she went to these apologists to get like, okay, is there any good reason to believe in Christianity? And I think she found some. But just because the apologist said it doesn't mean that's the only thing you can stand on. You guys like, are these good arguments? You got to think through it. Is there counter arguments and all that? And I agree with that. I think she would agree with that as well. Now on what did you just say? I wanted to make the child thing. The child thing, I do think that's a tough question of like the 5-year-old, and if they're brought up in a different, whether it's Islam or whatever, that they're going to hell and they were raised in the wrong belief. I guess there's the C.S. Lewis thing you just brought up. And then another thought would be that with God giving us free will and giving us the world we're living in, that may be necessary, that there is some people that grow up in false cults, and if they die as a 10-year-old in a false cult or whatever, that they are going to hell believing the wrong thing. And that was necessary for the most maximally amount of people to freely believe in the right thing. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like God is still a good God for creating a world that allows free will, and that in a free will world, there has to be some people that get deceived and believe the wrong thing for the maximum amount of people to believe in the right thing freely to go to heaven. Are you following me there at all?
Well, yeah, sure. You're getting very close to a Calvinist position that God sort of knew the 5-year-old's going to go to hell, and that's why she's created. I mean, I know you're not exactly saying that, but it's very, very close. And I really push back on that because it basically says, I mean, imagine if I say to you, hey, look, you know, I'm going to give you $1 million and make your life wonderful, but you and Mary need to commit to have 10 kids, knowing that 5 of them I'm going to take and torture. Like, I'm going to keep them alive till they're 90 years old and torture them every day. Like, would you take that deal? Like, it's going to be maximally beneficial for your 5 kids that don't get tortured. Now, come on, you would never take that deal.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I would posit that you are a better person and more moral and good than the God posited by the Calvinists, for instance, because that God, like when you hear atheists say, hey, if you prove to me God's real, I'd still reject him. What they mean is, if you prove to me a certain type of God, like the Calvinist God, yeah, if you prove to me the Calvinist God was true, I would worship Satan in a second, because that God is evil as I can possibly imagine. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I hate Calvinism more than I hate any other religion, even the Taliban. I hate Calvinists more because I put more responsibility that they've grown up in an environment where they should know better, because that to me, that's an evil doctrine. And it goes back to, when you look at it in, it's the old thing, like, one death's a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. It's kind of the same flippant attitude. Hey, billions of people are going to hell, but that's okay, because there's 100 million are going to go to heaven and they're going to have a great time. No, I mean, as an atheist, I have enough empathy. No, like, if even one person has to go to hell, I reject the whole thing. Like, I don't want to play that game. And I would sacrifice myself to save the world, like, truly sacrifice. Unlike Jesus, who, he suffered for a few days and went to heaven to become king. No, I'll go to hell forever to save all the rest of the humanity. That's how I would do it, which makes me, in my opinion, better than Jesus. Like, Jesus isn't sacrificed. How is Jesus sacrificing for you right now? He's in heaven. He's God. He can do anything he wants. He has no pain. He can do anything. Right. So I'm telling you right now, Tanner, I would go to hell for you, and I would suffer forever in hell if you included the whole world. So to me, so there's a million what ifs we could do that posit some better situation. And so the Christian is always forced to justify, well, God's not really bad because reason. And of course, part of our criticism is, guess what? There's 1,000 reasons. Why should I trust you over the Calvinist? And maybe the Calvinist is right, or maybe the Mormon's right. Now, when we look back at Mormonism, we say, oh, come on, this can't possibly be real, right? But the only reason Mormonism is different from Christianity and Paul and the early Christians is that it's newer, and that we can actually see, like, we have more information to say, like, Joseph Smith was a person, like, we know more about Joseph Smith than we know about, say, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, because he lived in the modern world where there's records, there's court records, there's photographs and eyewitnesses and stuff, that newspaper articles, right? So there's more. But, like, and Muhammad did the same thing. So Muhammad's claim was, hey, I got a new message, right? Well, this is the same thing
Mhm.
that Paul said. Paul said, guess what? I got a new message. Like, I used to be a Jew, and then now I'm opening the door to Gentiles, and we don't have to be circumcised. We don't have to eat kosher food. We don't have to follow the Sabbath. Like, that is a new message. So from a Jew's position, Christianity is a cult, and it's no different from Mormonism. Now, the reason that you don't believe that is because you're seeing this bigger picture and say, oh, well, it's been around 2000 years and not 150 years. And, there's more of a shroud of mystery. So it makes it more palatable to say, well, it's lasted 2000 years. So, I mean, what happens if Jesus doesn't come back for 2000 years and there's, a billion Mormons on the planet saying, we've been around for 1,000 years, right? um, so, so those
Um,
things.
one comment on that. So I could see the similarity you're bringing up between Paul and like Muhammad and Joseph Smith. Of it's like a vision, an experience that
Yes.
they get this message and they teach it. But I guess the difference that I see between that is not. I'll get to Paul, but like with the other disciples, like we'll say John, Peter, the 12, they're not dying and sincerely. Do you think they sit? For I guess it's a separate argument, but because they were willing to die for what they believed in, you would say they sincerely thought that Jesus rose from the dead, is what I would think. But a jihadi is willing to die for what he believed in,
Mhm.
of the Quran and stuff like that. So they're sincere, but doesn't mean they're wrong. But the difference between like a jihadi, a Muslim, and what they believe and what Muhammad believed from the disciples is they believe in something they actually saw and touched and walked with it.
Well,
Than
first, stop for a minute.
yeah, yeah,
That is an assertion on your part, but we actually have no evidence that they actually saw those things, because we have no evidence that those things actually happen, which is like a whole nother rabbit trail. So we could do one of two
yeah,
things here. We could spend another two
yeah,
hours
yeah, yeah.
deconstructing that.
I,
But I
I
think
agree. I
maybe
agree.
I mean, I really enjoy this, and I think if you would like to continue these conversations, because
Yeah,
I
I'm
think they're
enjoying it,
beneficial,
man.
we could schedule something later to talk about that, because it's a different subject. Because what you guys said in the beginning of your video, what you and Mary said, was this doesn't get us to the Christian God yet. It just gets us back, the theological argument and the Kalam just get us
Yeah,
to a God. So if you don't mind, let's rewind back to that, because the 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 impetus kind of this conversation was my criticism that, and also what Prophet of Zod was criticizing, was it didn't sound like Mary was really being a critical free thinker. And I don't want to accuse her of that. It's just, that's my perception. It didn't sound like she said, while I was in college and had doubts, I read Dawkins and Krauss and George Smith and Sam Harris, and I studied evolution, and I studied alternatives. I studied quantum physics. And after studying all of that stuff, I've decided Christianity is true. No, what it sounded like is she said, I had doubts, so I did what many Christians do, is I went to Lee Strobel, and Christianity is obviously true because Lee Strobel said so. That's what it
yeah,
sounded like. Now, if her experience was different, for one, I would love to hear it. And also I would love to hear like your comment on that in terms of your own, like, certainly by your age, you've had some periods of like thoughts and doubts, and maybe have changed your mind. For me, it was,
yeah,
I used to be a young earth creationist, and I read some Hugh Ross, and who's a Christian astrophysicist, and I became an old earth. I still believed in ID, but that was a big shift for me, though. Like, to say I was wrong. I don't believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. I still believe evolution's false. Like, I believed evolution was impossible, but that was still a big shift for me. So, anyways, let me shut up for a minute, and maybe you could interject kind of if you know what Mary actually was
yeah.
trying to say, and how you feel about it.
Well, I think part of the problem was that we were making these videos for our students, our
Uh huh.
Christian students, and so the mindset of the audience
Right.
was for our students, not for internet people or like other atheists that might watch.
Sure.
And so I feel like that's part of the confusion on her part of how she presented herself. Um, and then and so I honestly could
Hmm.
see watching our video how it could look like that, like
Yeah.
that, and so I think that's part of the problem. But then, like my own experience, like, yeah, I for sure have doubts. I've had doubts at different times, and at moments have doubts for sure. And then, so like for instance, when I was in 10th grade, I had a injury. I'm a wrestler. That's like that was my high school thing, into wrestling. Had an injury, couldn't wrestle anymore. My parents, her marriage was really struggling, a lot of fighting. My brother got locked up in jail for drugs. Just like a lot of things, it was just
Sure.
depression was really setting in my life. I was
Uh-huh.
struggling with pornography. I felt like this hypocritical Christian, all these different things. Um, and when I was in that dark place, I'm like, man, like Christianity is not real. Like my life sucks right now. If God was real, he wouldn't let me go through all this crap. And I'm like, maybe he isn't real. And if he was real, he probably wouldn't love me, type of stuff. And so I thought about suicide. I was super depressed. Um, just like crying through the hallways at school, stuff like that. And so in that time, I'm like, God, if you're real, please reveal yourself to me. Please show yourself to me. I'm like reading the Bible, trying to like, is this book legit at all? And during that time, I felt I've had, like, I brought up those emotional counters, like as Christians, we believe that the Bible is God's word, alive and active, all that. And I felt like for the first time in my life, maybe not the first time, but first a big part, for stronger than I ever had in my life, like the Bible came real to me, and like I feel like I wasn't just reading a book, but it was talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know all that has to be like taken with uh salt, or what do you say that? Because the Mormon could claim the same thing or whatever, but
Right.
it was real for me in that moment, and
Yeah, I've been
yeah,
in the same place, and I completely empathize and understand.
yeah,
So the pushback is what you just exactly said. If if we can show, like, systematically with data, that everybody that goes through those struggles that you went through, that gets better through religion, has like the bell curve is equal across Mormonism and Hinduism and Islam and sheiks and new age believers. Like, I mean, you can go on YouTube and find a million new agers that would say exactly what you just said, but then my chakra and my stars and this align, and now I'm happy, right? So there has to be something more if our question is what's true,
yeah,
not what works. I mean, I'll admit to you, Christianity works. Like, if you're a drug addict and an alcoholic and you're addicted to porn or gambling and you get Jesus, hey, it works all the time. I've seen it. Like, I knew people that came out of homosexuality that, like, I'm now straight and I have a wife and kids because of Jesus. So it's not that it doesn't work, but that's a separate question. Is it actually true? Because the same methodologies work for other religions, other gods, and even secular. Like, you can get secular therapy and have the same thing. Hey, I went to an atheist psychiatrist who was really good, and he gave me some Prozac and he had me work through these steps. And today I'm self-aware and I'm adjusted and I'm doing well at my job and I have a good relationship with my partner. Well, does that mean atheism works? Like it doesn't. It may, yeah, but it doesn't mean any of those things are true. And
yeah,
that's the question we're asking, right?
yeah. No, I
So
totally agree with that. That makes
yeah.
sense.
So going back to that, like, how do we know that we're using the right method?
Yeah.
And
That's a good question. That's a good question. I guess um, I'm not sure how to answer that. What would you say?
I would say the best methodology that humans have come up with is the scientific method, using Socratic questions and a methodology based on Bayesian logic. So
Yeah, yeah.
right.
Logic.
So
Yeah,
it's um, so the scientific method isn't to try to figure out absolute proofs or absolute truths. It's to try to build a model that best represents what we experience, can test, we can observe. So for instance, if we were going to do a scientific test on, let's say, religion, we would want a big sample size, and we would want a fair, like, blind studies, and we would ask questions like, do these miracles, like, is there third party corroboration to these miracle stories? Is there is there reliable data that when Christians pray for cancer recovery, that their recovery rates are a higher percentage than atheist or Mormons or Buddhists or anybody else, or or does it seem to just track like we're all humans and we all we all have the same thing? So that would be the right way. So if we go back to how do you know that the sun doesn't go around the earth? Like, go outside and tell me that the earth is going around the sun. It's contradictory to our senses. Tell me that the earth is spinning around thousands of miles an hour and spinning through space and in a galaxy that's spinning. None of that makes any sense, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
our senses tell us that the sun rises and sets on a earth that's pretty flat and stable. That's what our senses tell us. And so the scientific method says, let's build a model and test the model and see. So when
yeah.
Galileo got a telescope and pointed at the stars, he started seeing things that didn't fit that model. He said, wait a minute, if our model is the sun does this and we're stable, it doesn't fit the data that I'm seeing. So that model, and he came up with a new model. And guess what? The new model's held up pretty well. So so that's the method that we use
Yeah,
to
and
test,
that's logical. Makes
right?
sense.
So applying that to obviously to religion gets a little bit tricky because there's things where then faith gets injected. So the atheist, or even even just the agnostic non-believer, would say, well, the moment you inject faith, you're asking me to trust something that I can't test, I can't see, I can't observe, and everyone's telling me their version, and they're all in they all kind of contradict each other beyond maybe there's a God. Like, you could say, look, all theists believe there's a God. Well, okay, that's a tautology, but fine, I'll accept it. Everyone that's a theist believes there's a God. But once you get past that, the nature of God, even in Christianity, is an like there's churches down the street from you that don't believe in the Trinity. Like I think they're called Oneness Pentecostals, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
um, these are honest people. They have doctors and lawyers and geniuses and smart people. And I mean, and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, we look at that and say, how could you believe that? It's crazy. When I was younger, I used to think, how can Jews reject Jesus? It's nuts. Like, what's wrong with these people? Are they stupid? Because it's so obvious. This is after I read Josh McDowell, right? So, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Read this as a teenager, and I see this is obviously true. Jesus is obviously God and obviously the Messiah. How could a Jew possibly reject that, right? So at the time, there's like this arrogance in there because I had no idea. Turns out I'm Jew by birthright. My mom's a Jew. I'm half Jew, but I didn't know
Oh,
any of
cool.
that. I was not raised that way. I don't know anything about Judaism. But when I got a little older and wiser and I started looking at the reasons that Jews don't accept Jesus, and it's the same would apply to the Muslim. Now I see it. And so this goes back to the criticism, back to the kalam and the teleological argument and the fine-tuning argument, and the stuff that the conversation started at is, in my challenge in my video to Mary was, wait a minute, you're not telling me you listened to 10 hours of Sean Carroll lectures and read his books and you're rejecting quantum mechanics because reason. You're saying you listen to William Lane Craig and that's it. I mean, that's not fair, right? So I guess one of the things I in this conversation that I was hoping to ask you is, like, what do you feel about my argument that you're not steel manning the other side, so you don't even know what it is, and you're rejecting something that you don't understand seemingly. Now maybe I'm wrong and you do, but it seems as if you haven't. And I know as a Christian, I didn't do this. Nobody ever told me go read these other people. I never did. I only read Phil Yancey and Greg Boyd and Max Lucado and John Eldridge and Dallas Willard and C.S. Lewis and blah 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 blah. I never read anybody else. Never.
Yeah. So for me, I can't totally answer for my wife. I'm not sure what she's all read or watched. But for me, I would say that I'm at a place where, like, through high school, college, I'm really trying to read through the Bible, make sure like I understand what I actually believe personally. And there's recently, I'm like, okay, is there any like intellectual reasons to believe in Christianity? I've been looking into the apologist arguments and seem like good arguments to me, but I'm sure, as you and Prophet Zod pointed out, that we haven't really addressed the counter arguments to those very well. And so I'm not well read. I would admit that, but I feel like I, that don't. I feel like it's not wrong to really know what you believe first, and then to see how it compares to other things first, instead of just like going wherever. Because then, if I didn't really know what I believe first, then I would just believe that. Then I believe, I feel like you got a strong understanding what you actually believe to see what it weighs up against something else.
Well, and the argument to that is, how could you say what you believe until you've investigated? So that
Okay.
what you're
Yeah.
saying sounds to me like, Michael, I know the sun goes around the earth. That's what I believe, because I see it. The sun goes around the earth.
Uh,
Like when I go outside and observe the world I live in, the sun goes around the earth, and I really need to believe that first before I bother this Galileo guy. Why would I listen to him? I need to be grounded in the flat earth. So to me, that sounds like your your starting position. Now I get what you're saying, like you have to come up with some beliefs, but what I'm saying is, how do you land on a belief without all of the information? Now, of course, I don't mean infinity. You don't
yeah.
have time to study everything,
Yeah.
but in general.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, in your analogy, is there arguments for a flat Earth? What are those arguments? And then once you know those, okay, let's take those and compare them to the heliocentric arguments or whatever.
Sure,
Yeah.
right. Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying, and
Yeah.
that going back to the argument about the kalam is like, okay, if you're going to argue, I believe that a God exists because of the kalam, like this logic, and you went through it, it sounds solid, right? So
Yeah.
especially if you're telling this to a 13 or 14-year-old, like, this is valid because here's the reasons. If you don't know, well, at least the main arguments against that, and can steel man them, then it's impossible to be a free thinker. Then you're just somebody indoctrinating children and indoctrinating yourself. Because if you don't know, now I'm not talking about every wild theory, obviously nobody has time for that. But for example, William Lane Craig and Sean Carroll did a debate about 8 or 9 years ago. And William Lane Craig was way out of his field. Like, he's an apologist arguing.
Oh yeah, I just watched that
Yeah,
actually.
he's
Yeah.
arguing astrophysics, like he doesn't know the field, right?
Yeah.
So the problem with that is, again, it's like, it's not fair to say William Lane Craig makes good arguments why the kalam is true, and these other, like, he doesn't know the other things like Sean Carroll does because he studied them. Now, if you can if you can reiterate and steelman Sean Carroll's position and still reject it, that's fine. But even in that debate, even at the end, William Lane Craig was still misquoting people. He was quote mining. Even when Sean Carroll said, "Hey, you're quoting me and you're wrong. Like, I didn't, like, you're quoting me out of context," and he didn't. He, like, William Lane Craig never apologizes, and he does that quite a bit. But he also kept saying, you can't have something from nothing, right? That, I mean, he kept saying that even through the end of the debate. Nobody's saying that. So it's like, you're arguing against a straw man that everyone in the room knows is a straw man. It doesn't make sense to me unless your purpose is to deceive people. So if William Lane Craig would say, "Look, I understand the quantum mechanics. Like, I understand what you're saying. I reject it because these reasons. Like, here are my reasons for rejecting that thing." But he kept saying, "No, you can't get something popping out of nothing." I'm like, and I watched a few snippets of that like 3 or 4 times because I really wanted to see, what are people saying. And the problem I see as from the atheist side is, William Lane Craig is a good speaker, and he throws out just so many big sentences and words that anyone that's young and impressionable, that has a predisposition to believe in Christianity, wants to accept him on authority. Like, here's a smart guy, I'm in good hands. But if you actually know the arguments, he's just spouting nonsense because he's not addressing the actual argument. Now, he may be right. You may be right. There may be a God. Fine. But the proof or evidence that there is a God is not that something can't come from nothing, because nobody is positing that. Like, that's not the state of quantum mechanics today. It's not what Lawrence Krauss or any of the guys that study this are actually saying. So it's not fair to, it's not, it's disingenuous. And I think I said that in my video. It's like, Mary, you have to stop saying this, you need to qualify what you're saying, because it's either disingenuous, like if you're naive, that's fine. That's just a mistake. But if you know the other argument and you keep saying that, then you're lying. You're deceiving people. That's not fair. So the other people can be wrong. Like we can both agree, we don't believe that the Quran is the revealed word of God from Muhammad, right? We mean no disrespect to Muhammad. We mean no disrespect to Muslims, but we believe it's wrong. And like, here's the reasons. But we need to be able to say, like, we understand what they're saying. It would be like if I said, I don't believe in Jesus because Jesus claimed that his alternate personality was Walt Disney, and Jesus created Mickey Mouse. Like, we have drawings from the first century of Mickey Mouse signed by Jesus. And you would say to me, Michael, that doesn't exist. Like, that's a straw man of Jesus. So that's the complaint, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that we're not accurately representing the other side. Yeah.
Correct. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, I was thinking about this last night, is correct me if I'm misunderstanding or misstating your position, but your position is there was a void, right? Nothing existed, but except for God, who is timeless, eternal. Okay. So my question is to you, what material did God use to make the universe?
Well, I would think that God's God. He doesn't need material. He can create material. Yeah.
Okay. So God made the universe from nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Mary says something can't come from nothing, but something came from nothing.
Yeah, but no.
Don't say yeah, but don't say yeah, but. If your position is that God made the universe from nothing, so something can come from nothing in your worldview, it required a creator God, right? He had to do something, but
yeah,
never.
But
Well,
we're not.
God wasn't material, right?
We're saying there's absolutely nothingness. No God, no nothing. No, nothing's going to happen because there's absolutely nothing.
Agreed. So we agree on that. If there's absolutely nothing, nothing can happen.
Yeah. But
right?
we're not saying we're saying there's a God. There's a creator.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm saying there was quantum physics, right?
Yeah,
So we were both starting from there's something. But my question to you is, when God, before the universe, before the Big Bang, before the universe, was there any material thing?
So so I guess I'm wrestling with this because like William and Craig and different people say that like time equals zero. Like people used to think there's nothing, but now people are saying there's like all these quantum particles, and I don't totally understand all that. I'll be the first to admit that. But even if there was this quantum particle field thing before even the universe began, that was eternally there, so I think is what you're arguing. That one thing I think William and Craig makes the argument of that quantum field would be unstable. It wouldn't just be able to eternally exist and then suddenly create a universe. But if that quantum field has existed eternally in unstable matter, then how come the universe didn't already make itself like infinitely in the past, but it just has recently made itself? You know what I'm saying?
Right. That's a totally fair question. So a couple points. One, be careful saying this is what you're saying, because all of my positing is just that. I actually believe it's more likely we live in a computer simulation, but that may be a fantasy, right?
Oh, like the legit Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, that's fictional, but this is, if anyone wants to follow up on this, it's Nick Bostrom's The Philosopher that gives the reasons, and that's a whole nother discussion. Now, I'm not saying I believe we live in a construct. I'm saying I believe it's possible we live in a construct. I also believe it's possible that there's a multiverse in which infinite number of universes popped out of this quantum, whatever you want to call it, quantum. I also think it's possible the universe has always existed and expanded and contracted. That's one of the theories. Like, it gets to a point and then gravity kind of reverses and it gets back to a singularity. I don't particularly like that theory, or hypothesis, but it's in the realm of what things are possible. Now, to be fair, I also believe there could be a creator God, although I wouldn't put high probability on the Christian God, or there is. I would more likely believe, like Thomas Paine's deist God, right? An intelligent being made this world, which kind of falls in the simulation theory as well, like an intelligence designed this universe, right? That is certainly in the realm of things that I posit as being possible. So all I'm saying is just be careful of assigning to me a belief, because my belief is like a Bayesian metrics of, okay, certain percentage here, certain percentage here. I'm not standing firm on, oh, I believe this thing.
Yeah, gotcha.
But to go back to my question to you, let's imagine that the quantum physics is wrong. Like there was no quantum physics before t equals 0. It was literally a void. So when God said, let there be light, that was the first thing. So my question to you is, what material did God use to make that energy? Because God, we agree that the Christian position, your position, is that God's timeless, eternal, but also immaterial, right? Like God doesn't have arms and legs and sex organs. Like he's a man through
Spirit being, yeah.
his authority as we call him father, but he's not he doesn't have to grow a beard, for instance, right?
Yeah, no, I
Right.
agree.
Okay, so that, how did that God make the universe? What did he use?
Well, I guess I would believe in a God who's able to like make matter out of nothing, you know.
Okay, there you go. So the thing you guys keep saying, that we don't believe something can come from nothing, is exactly the opposite of what you believe. You believe something can come from nothing, but it takes a supernatural.
Yeah, because
It
that's
takes,
not nothing. Yeah.
well, no, but he made it from nothing, right?
Yeah,
Nothing
but
in your position.
yeah.
Nothing, no material thing existed.
Yeah.
God's mind existed, but we agree that's not material, right?
Yes.
God's mind isn't quantum mechanics or particles. It's
Yeah.
something else, right?
Yeah.
So my point here is the very thing you guys are saying, that nothing, that it's been possible for something to come from nothing, is exactly the opposite of what you actually believe. You do believe something can come from nothing, but it took an immaterial, timeless, eternal, all-powerful God to do that. As an
Yeah.
atheist, we say you're what you're saying is magic. It's supernatural. And I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just saying be clear on what you're actually saying, because what you are positing is supernatural or magic, or God said in incantation, let there be light, and from nothing came something. That's your position, right?
Yeah, but I feel like it's kind of unfair to say that we believe that something came from nothing because we're not saying nothing. We're saying God, like
Yeah,
from
but God,
God, or
God, God is not a material. Like you're not limiting God to the material.
yeah,
Like
but
he didn't make the
the
universe out of his self.
yeah, but
He
the point is
spoke it.
there's a cause agent, and
Okay,
then
I
yeah,
agreed.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. There's a
yeah,
causal agent, but the causal agent made the universe out of nothing.
yeah,
Okay, so when you say that a universe can't come from nothing, you're contradicting your own position. What you need to say, to be logical and fair, is something cannot come from nothing unless there is a supernatural something. We want to call it magic, supernatural, a miracle, right? Without that agent, something can't come from nothing.
yeah.
Is that
Like
that's fair, right?
I don't think I don't think it's necessary to say that, but I think I can say that to be more clear to avoid the
Well, right,
confusion.
because
Yeah,
the problem is that you're assigning to our position, what William Lane Craig and what Mary kept saying is, you guys believe something came from nothing, and we're like, no, 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 we don't believe that. We believe there was something there, like the quantum physics just exists internally,
yeah,
and that it's unstable, and that it very well started the singularity and the Big Bang, and it very may well do that an infinite amount of times throughout. What that, the actual universe might not be just what we observe. There might be infinity universes. The visualization is like pop the top off a pop and watch the bubbles come up. They seemingly come from nowhere, but they didn't. There was something there, and it popped. So in Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos, the first episode had a graphic of that, like infinite numbers of bubbles popping into. So the the position that we have says, look, if we're going to make models to try to figure out, like, why do we exist? Like, this is like the question we all have. Why are we here? I don't care if you're an atheist or a Christian or any faith. This is a fundamental thing to consciousness. It's like, why are we conscious?
yeah,
So if we want to make a model, we, a fair way to do it is to look at look at the potentials that we have. So for instance, and again, I'm not arguing for this being true, but I'm arguing that the logic of it is logical and could exist. We know that computer power is increasing almost exponentially. We've seen AI grow, but in bizarre ways. Like the future is kind of crazy at the moment in terms of what's happening. So we know that it is quite potentially likely that we as humans will be able to build a computer virtual construct, a virtual world. So Nick Bostrom basically says, look, because we can actually see this happening, we have to either posit that no other civilization ever got there, or that we're the first. So Elon Musk's famous saying is, hey, it's 1,000,000,000 to 1 we're in the base universe. That's his position. So when we look at that, we can say lots of reasons, and there's atheists who think this is a crazy idea and doesn't exist. But in order to test these things, we need to say the model. How does the world that we look at fit that model? Well, the world that we live in actually fits that model pretty good, that we live in a construct. It's not entirely illogical. What about the world model that like a Thomas Paine deist God made the universe, right? I don't know if you read Common Sense or not.
I've not.
Kind of way back in the day, right? So for those that don't know, Thomas Paine was instrumental in starting both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. He
Oh
was a
yeah, I
brilliant.
think I've heard of him. Yeah.
Right. He wrote Common Sense, which helped spark the American Revolution. So he was very anti-Christian, but he was not a he didn't he believed in a God. Like at the time, he didn't have all the tools to see the world. So he saw the world and said, okay, if something made this, is the same basic argument that you're making. Like something had to do this, right? It's too complex and etc. But his treaty is basically, look, it's a God that like made the world, round up the clock, and doesn't touch it. And his evidence, and I would say it's pretty strong evidence, and Sean Carroll went through this list in his debate with William Lane Craig. Look at the world around us. Is there consensus on a God that's revealed himself? No, there's huge fights about what God is or what he's like. We would suspect, if you're going to build a model, that there's a loving, caring God, that he would make himself known to us. That isn't the case. Then the next step, is the world fine-tuned for humans to live? No, there's famine, there's floods, and I know you have arguments of like free will and so forth, but the model seems to line up with naturalism. So when Sean Carroll did that list, he's like, okay, we see this in the world and it fits the model. Like if we're going to posit, hey, naturalism or a theism, let's posit which of these meets the observations the closest. And it's hands down naturalism. Like the world's tough, like death and cancer and war and fighting and this giant universe of unused space. Like and for me, one of the strongest things was, if you're familiar with, I think it's in John, don't quote me on this, I think 17, but I could be wrong about that. It's the high priestly prayer.
Yeah.
Jesus says, Father, make them one to show the world, and I'm paraphrasing, that you love me and you sent me.
Yeah.
So my counter to that is Christianity divided immediately. I mean, there's never been a time that Christians haven't. Even Paul was saying, hey, some of you are saying you're of Peter, some of you are saying you're of Apollos, some of you are saying you're of Paul. So even in the very beginning, before the Gospels were written, before any of that, it had already fractioned. So Jesus's prayer was not answered by God. The church was not united. It was very, very divisive. And so to me, that gives me not only the license to not be a Christian, it gives me an obligation. If I posit that Jesus was a smart, honest, fair person, I'm going to take him at his word. You were not sent by God. And the proof is your prayer was not answered. There is no unity. And what I would say to you, Tanner, if I'm going to be a Christian, let's say I say, hey, maybe I'm wrong, I want to be a Christian. What church should I go to, Tanner? And what's your evidence that that is the right place? You can't give me anything except I feel my church is like close. Like hopefully you're at a church where you feel it's following God's mission, right? I know I felt that when I was at church. I didn't think, oh, I'm in a terrible cult and like I'm fighting against God. No, I thought, hey, like I know no church is perfect, but I think I'm at one of the best representations on earth, right?
Yeah.
So So that's a real problem. So going back to the basis of, hey, how do we start off with, right? How do we even decide there's a God? And we go back to that beginning. If we're not fair and we don't look at the whole thing, then we end up injecting, and I think this is what William Lane Craig does, is injecting what you already believe and saying, I'm going to prove this thing I already believe, as opposed to critical thinking.
Yeah. You've shared a lot of things there, so it's hard to
Yeah.
figure out which one to respond to. But I have to jump off here in a couple minutes.
Okay.
So I guess while we're on, um, so someone actually gave comments. I'd love to answer those real quick. Casper Holmes said, if there is a creator like God, the question still is who or what created him and what is God made of? I feel like I get that question a lot on the comments. And I guess the answer I would give is just God is the uncreated one. Like that's what makes him God. He's God Almighty. He's the one who was and is and who will always be. That's it. If someone created God, then that would be God. That's not who God
But
is.
no, I understand that. So let me put a splinter in your mind. God existed as Jesus and the Holy Spirit, right? The Trinity for all time.
Yes, sir.
Right, in your view. Okay, so before time equals zero, and you don't have to answer this question, just think about it. Before time equals zero, what got them to the point to make the universe? Did they cross time? Well, no, because you say time doesn't exist with just God. So did God always exist and the universe always existed? And if you say no, the universe had a start, then you're placing a restriction on God, saying there was a time when God existed without the universe, which means he had to cross time, in my opinion. I don't know what else you would say to get there.
Well, I think that's actually an argument for God, because since if the universe had a beginning, it's much more sense that whatever started it had to like choose to start it, and God is a free agent who can freely choose to start the universe.
Right. But when did he decide to choose?
Whenever he wanted to. He's God.
But no, but yeah, I understand that. But when? Like, imagine the time that God. Sorry, the camera's. I'm opposite of the camera. Imagine the time. Here's the universe, and here's God. Right. So I'm saying, look, halfway to when he chose, he would have had to cross time. But you're saying time doesn't exist. So you're saying there's a time before God chose. The word chose implies a time. Like if you're going to choose to have a tuna sandwich for dinner, like a minute ago, you hadn't made that choice. Like there has to be something that happens. Yeah. So what happened? What changed in God that made him choose to make the universe? Right. So
yeah, I don't know how you can answer that.
You can't, right? You can't answer that, right? So it goes back to the same thing. Like, what made God? Well, you can't answer that. He just always existed. Yeah. Well, if the universe didn't always exist, then that means God, at some point, like in your own words, chose to make it. Well, what was he doing before he chose that? Like, and how long of a time was that? Because you're saying time didn't exist. So if there's no time, then time zero, the universe and God are they happen instantaneously together.
I can kind of,
you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So anyway, something to think about. I know you're saying you got to go. What I would hope, if you're enjoying this and you want to do this again, is maybe email me with, like, if you want to throw Mary in here and continue this line, I'm happy. Or if you would like to go to the next step, I'm happy with that. It's a lot of fun for me. And
yeah, no, I'm
enjoying myself.
I really enjoying this conversation too, Michael. What I would be interested in too next time is, I feel like we both have this try to chime up with the explanation of why we're here. Mm-hmm. And I feel like both of them require some sense of faith, of like looking at the evidence and like making a type of decision of what is the most reasonable thing to believe in. And so trying to talk about what is more reasonable to believe in of why we're here, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure. It's applying like a Bayesian logic, a reasoning to it, and applying a probability. I'm assuming you wouldn't say, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you are not 100% positive, with absolutely no room for error, that everything you believe is true, right? Like there has to be, right? So there's some room for, like, and I would say the same thing. I know there's room for me to be wrong. So as long as we're both willing to say we could be wrong about some things, let's investigate how to find out.
Yeah,
right? Fair enough.
I'm a fallible human being. I don't think
Okay.
I know all truths.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed this, and I'm glad my computer started working.
Me too, Michael. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. We'll email and try to figure something out. But
Sounds
cool.
good. All
Thanks,
right.
man.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
You too.